Hello and good day, and welcome to my class. Today's episode is focused on the issue of widening economic gap and inequalities in education. Together, let us take a look at global condition that separates the rich and the poor, and let us analyze how this separation creates inequalities in education, affecting the lives and educational opportunities of vulnerable children, not only in the Philippines but all over the world. For your guidance, our discussion will revolve around how coronavirus reveals deep fissure in many countries all over the world, the economic dignity and the different forces that contribute to the widening gap between the haves and the have-nots. How does income inequality lessen the educational opportunities of the less fortunate children, especially in the underdeveloped nations? Let us also take a look at the data revealing students' achievement gap in schools and how our children are affected by pandemic, forcing them to drop out due to the impact of huge digital divide. In the end, what are the possible solutions to mitigate this global concern? Well, the economic inequality has long been existing across the globe. However, the COVID 19 pandemic provides a grim picture of this deep and long rift between the rich and the poor. For example, there is a dissonance between our nation's labeling of workers as essential and heroes and their limited wages and benefit and ability to organize. In a survey conducted by World Bank, 10% of world's population, or 734 million people, lived on less than $1.9 or less a day. Well, just enough to buy you a kilo of rice in the Philippines. And this is expected to rise during and after pandemic. Data show that 1 out of 10 people across the globe experience hunger. 815 million people could not get enough food for a healthy life. And the sad fact that 9 million people die of hunger and hunger related diseases every year, mostly in Africa and developing nations. While these are happening, 62 of the wealthiest people alive possess more wealth collectively than half the human race. So, that is the total wealth of 3.7 million people. At least, this figure provided you an overall picture of how imbalanced the distribution of our world resources is. There are two defining characteristics of income and wealth gap. One, it is unfair and unjust. Since the poor becomes poorer and the rich becomes even richer, at the end, the marginalized receives the hardest blow and becoming the collateral damage. It is senseless and it impedes economic growth because the inequality does not create a lot of equity and equal opportunities to the less privileged. The growing number of joblessness impedes or slows down economic growth, thus affecting the development of the nation in general. Gene Sperling, the former economic advisor of Presidents Clinton and Obama, presented his analysis on the growing chasm in relation to economic inequality. And in his book, Economic Dignity, he urged his readers, especially the masses, to measure the economic dignity using the three tests. First, do you have the ability to take good care of your family without economic deprivation or desperation? Second, do you have the enough opportunities to pursue your dreams and potentials with a sense of purpose and meaning? And lastly, do we have our ability to contribute and participate in our economy? The third test, he said, deserves much greater attention in a world where economic inequality becomes the order of the day. And for him, the concept of dignity is an essential element of the modern human rights, and so people must not be deprived of that economic dignity. In the previous lesson, you are already aware of the existence of economic inequality, but uncertain of the different forces that drive the gap between the rich and the poor. The automation, for example, has displaced millions of mid and low income workers here and abroad. The outsourcing is also a major driver, both in this country and through ever expanding global chains. Although this strategy yields significant cost savings to companies and consumers and can offer jobs to work around the world, businesses often fail to dedicate sufficient attention to offset the negative consequences. There is also limited oversight and regulation that contributed to the economic gap since most of the laws that are crafted favors the company owners, thereby neglecting the right of the workforce. But what are the impacts of inequality to our young generation's educational opportunities? Well, there is a wide educational achievement gap among the rich and the poor children that threatens the future of our economic growth. In fact, the socioeconomic factor contributes largely on this achievement gap, with only a select few individuals receiving the best education and enrichment. We are failing to develop the economic potentials of our future workforce. And on top of these, affluent parents are spending more on their kids to ensure educational success during economic uncertainties, thus lessening the leverage of the children coming from the low income families. And this is substantiated by the statement of Stavros Yanukas during World Innovation Summit in Qatar in 2020. And he said that poor children lose the opportunities to study and only the rich can afford schooling. In the comparative study conducted by the UNICEF in 2019, rich and poor children scored differently on school pre-kindergarten exams, favoring the children of the high-income family. And there is 10% gap in the achievement between the poor and the rich students. This data is attributed to the readiness of the affluent children, considering they have a lot of educational materials at home. But the sad reality remains that 50% belonging to low and middle income countries cannot read and understand a basic text at the age of 10, posing a great problem in many public school systems. Dr. Putnam of Harvard University proved that family income and wealth have became increasingly correlated with the positive engagement of the children inside and outside the classroom. I know that all of us will agree that COVID-19 pandemic will certainly exacerbate inequality. Many people lose their jobs, there will be increased migration, etc. But the most affected group of this outbreak are our children and youth, especially their educational advancement. In 2018 alone, 258 million school-aged children were out of school, both in the global north and the global south. The ongoing crisis forced 1.2 billion children to find themselves out of school, at least physically, since 146 countries closed their respective schools. In the words of Vishal Talvija, he claimed that the poor children are more vulnerable during this challenging time. Dropouts, migrations, and unavailable access to the internet are three leading factors that would make education of poor children volatile and uncertain. The increasing digital divide will surely be observable during this pandemic and the Revolution 4.0, where the marginalized will be in the disadvantaged side. School shutdowns will be more difficult for them to receive quality education. And the challenge attempting to virtually educate students will serve futile since significant portion of them have no computers, no laptops, no mobile devices, and no internet. That's why Dr. Shepard of Kansas Public School System argued that internet is no longer a public utility. Internet is no longer a public utility, but it's a part of the right. So, digital divide is only a manifestation of the worst cause, and that is economic inequality. And there are ways to fix it. Well, the sooner, the better. The challenge to many countries is how do we bridge the gap on economics and education? The stakeholders need to be less worried about how disruptive new technologies are, but to be more proactive in understanding and harnessing them for the public use. We must not only focus on the current needs of the students, but also to make sure that our systems are ready and will work to take students into the future. In terms of economic growth, governments and schools must provide equitable and equal educational opportunities across the income spectrum. The educators must take the lead of creating and implementing programs that will effectively engage poor students. These programs must be inclusive and comprehensive to reach out all students. And we must also invest on parents' educational development to help them become children's first and best teacher. On the part of our lawmakers, they must create laws providing decent wage to all workers. It is about time to revisit, revise, recalibrate our curricula to break the rising disconnect between the world of learning and the world of work. Above all, our educational and economic decisions must be based on research based knowledge of practices that work. Countries with high inequality are more likely to fall into financial crisis and less likely to have sustained economic growth. Rampant educational inequality also damages our economic growth and long-term stability by weakening our tax base, limiting our ability to compete in a global marketplace, and of course, weakening our democracy. This global issue challenges the different societal and political structures across nations and economic status. Educators like us play a pivotal role in changing the current educational landscape by trying our very best to narrow the different divides in the different spectrum. We must focus on what we can do in the classroom by providing a strongly sensitive and empathetic environment and to deeply understand the varying needs and plights of our poor children. Well, regardless of diversity, race, culture, gender, and economic status, we have to provide equal opportunities for them so that we can help them regain their self-respect and hope that someday they can be whatever they wanted them to be. At the end of the day, it is always our current young generation and their children's children future at stake. So let us not deny them of the brighter future ahead of them that they truly deserve. For further studies, you may visit the links and list of reference materials below. Thank you so much.